This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Investor Connect is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors and startups for fundraising. Please consider donating $100 to the program to help others in their investor and entrepreneur journey. You can find the donate button on the investorconnect.org website. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Giuseppe Liberati, Executive Director at Bridging Value and board member of Houston Angel Network. Bridging Value, LLC, has successfully helped global startups, business units, and small to large global organizations facilitate product, organizational, and ecosystem activation and transformation since 2016. Giuseppe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. And, it's very interesting as we've been exchanging ideas over the past, few months. Actually, there's a lot of great topics to talk about. Thank you for having me over.
Great. So tell us more about your background before investing in early stage companies.
Yeah, that's a very profound question. I could say that. That's the least. So I'm actually, I have two master's degrees, one in mechanical engineering, one in metallurgical engineering, one from the University of Pisa in Italy. So I'm Italian. I cannot hide it, by the way, and I will not hide it. And the second one is actually with the Colorado School of Mines. So that's something very, very interesting and very reputable organization in engineering. And definitely it's an organization that is actually pushing technology and advancement in lots of fields that I definitely recommend for young students anyway. So secondly, with that background, you'd say, okay, this is a very technical kind of guy. And what's interesting is that in my career, I had the chance to jump from very technical to very commercial and all the way to being the head of innovation for large corporations. And what's interesting in that journey is that I had to learn the lingo of the different stakeholders along the path. And so if you look at my curriculum, you can see that I have 9 patents. I have published papers on very advanced metallurgy, and I've created international brands. So I kind of like to challenge myself. And so that's how I got there. So one of the challenges I had in front of me was the moment I decided to create Bridging Value, which is basically a company trying to bridge the value of large corporations and startups, but not forgetting the small, medium-sized companies that are very pragmatic and also very agile in some of the solutions they're bringing. So at a certain point when we create this business ecosystems, as you mentioned at the beginning, we find that there's some gaps. When those gaps are present, we scout for startups that we would like to introduce to our clients or into those ecosystems. And that's how I got involved into that.
Great. So what excites you right now?
Oh, what stage? So there's different things that are exciting me right now. So one of the things we're working on is the energy matrix transformation. So it's a very broad concept, but one of the things we notice is that, when you start changing energy or energy sources, energy distribution, energy storage, and so on, you change the entire ecosystem around it. You just don't change one piece of the puzzle and the picture stays the same. Because that piece of the puzzle is not going to fit the same way as the previous one does. So you have to redesign the picture. So that's what we're working on. And 2 areas that we found extremely interesting are space and water. You would say, why those 2? Well, first of all, because water and air are the 2 most basic elements that as human beings, we will always need no matter where we are, on this planet, any other planet. And we are pushing the boundaries on the access to fresh water. I don't know if you knew, but Fortune described a few years ago the fact that the global GDP actually follows more the trend of access to fresh water than availability of energy. So, which is very interesting. So we're trying to take water for granted, but I think water is an integral piece of our energy matrix, and we should actually take that as with a more integral look at it, and that's what we're doing. So we're looking at that. The second piece is it's space and space technologies. So one of the things that's interesting is that we held a panel discussion with the Houston Angel Network. And one thing that came up, one sentence that was very interesting, is that we do not live, so we learn to live, so let me say it that way. We learn to live in an open society in the sense We take something, we use it, and then we throw it away. And we don't think about the trash and the debris. If you're in space, you cannot do that. And so, as Jack Fisher, a friend, an astronaut, and he said, tomorrow's coffee is today's coffee, because water is fully recycled. Every human debris is actually recycled on space. And so, can we improve that? How much of the technologies that are being tested and developed in space can actually improve our life here? And how much can we, from here, keep improving space? And I don't know if any of the people listening to the podcast have attended that panel discussion, but we have a potentiality of an economy like Brazil or Australia flying between us and a low Earth orbit, which is presently developing. So imagine in this big, world crisis where we don't know where the economy is going, and now all of a sudden one of the top economies of the world appears out of the blue. What happens? Who's going to play in that economy? So those are the two things that keep me not actually make me look at the future in a very positive way.
Great. So you see a lot of startups and a lot of investors out there. What's your advice for people investing in startups in space or water? What do you tell them to do before they write that check?
No, it's interesting and a challenging question at the same time. The first thing I'd say, be patient, because space is not something that's you're not gonna see returns right away. So you have to be patient, and you have to be really willing to dig and be somehow involved. What I mean by that, there's especially when you talk about space. Let's talk about space, which is actually like more enticing. Well, by the way, I don't know if you heard that thanks to SpaceX, Elon Musk is likely to become the first person worth more than $1 trillion. So I'm like, so space is actually an impact. It's going to have an impact on us, not only on his wallet. Let's put it this way. But if you're looking at that, there's so many different technologies that are completely out there. How can you not say, okay, this is going to be the winning one? So be patient. Look at the team. Ask questions. Do not be worried about asking silly questions. Some of them might sound silly when you have big PhDs in front of you, but maybe you help them also drive the analysis and the in-depth understanding of what they're asking money for, from a startup perspective. And again, the last but not least, the teams are the ones that make the success of a startup. So look at the people, look at the team, talk to them, and keep in mind that your $1 today might be, maybe $1 million a few years ago from a few years from today, because the multipliers there are huge.
Great. And then on the other side of that table, what's your advice for people running startups? What do you tell them to do before they go out to raise funding?
Yeah, that's some of my daily job when I mentor startups and sitting on the board of some of them. First of all, you have to have a clear vision of what you want to do, and you have to show the path to accomplish that vision. By doing that exercise, you will identify gaps constantly. Don't hide them under the carpet. Address them. Take them head on. You need a new team. You need a new member that helps you grow. Think about that. That's extremely important. I usually advise startups with three different, I always talk about the three resources. The cheapest one is money. Money seems like the big thing that every startup is looking for, but the cheapest one is money. There's always money available out there. And remember, the money, when it comes to you, it comes with a cost. So what is the cost of that check that you're getting from an investor? First of all. Second point, the one that's actually, I think, is extremely interesting, is people. If you have a lot of money and you don't have the right people, you might not make the success of your company. But if you have the right people and very little money and people are committed and you have a great vision to share with people, then you can actually have major success because people are committed. The last one and the most valuable of all the resources is time, especially if you're racing to get to the market with new technology, new solution. Time is something that is not, you cannot regenerate time. You cannot recycle time. Time is gone. So think about the people, think about your time, look at your vision, and then ask for money.
Great. And so let's talk about the state of investing in startups. How do you see the industry evolving from here?
I'd say the industry is actually has two positive sides and two negative sides. So the two positive sides that people are kind of like understanding that by now it's very well established in the economy that entrepreneurs are going to be present and are going to be pushing technology and innovation no matter where in any angle of the world, any country around the world. So that's a pretty great possibility for people to invest. So that you're going to have that possibility of investing there. So that's one thing. That's a positive thing. Second positive thing is that companies are going to start competing more and more and trying to solve more complex challenges. So that's going to be a global advancement of human knowledge and human technology. So we're not now bound one or two companies that are going to be the one leading edge. On the flip side is that obviously when you have a lot of companies, how do you choose the right one? So you have to do a lot of due diligence. So it's a lot more work to find the right one. And the other flip side is that, okay, I strongly ask people to really look carefully into your comfort zone. Don't overdo it. Don't put too much money onto companies if you're not feeling like it. Keep in mind that you're putting your resources that you earned, you put sweat on it, and you entrusting those resources to somebody else. So that check that you're going to write is not just the money that you put in there. It's a building of trust. It's a bridge of trust. So remember that, because every time the trust is broken, it's gone.
That's a good point. So what do you think is the biggest change we'll see in, say, the next 12 to 24 months in early stage funding?
Well, one thing that definitely you will hear that on and on is actually the ESG piece. I think all the companies are going to be looking and going to be scored, going to be vetted on what impact they have into solving the environmental, social, and governance issues of larger organizations. That might push larger organizations to spin off some activities and make them float on their own. So there might be other opportunities there. Ultimately, we had to start, and that's one of the things we do at Bridging Value, is really building those ecosystems where people work together.
That's great. So let's talk about your investment thesis and criteria. What exactly is your thesis, and what is your core criteria for pursuing a deal or not?
Well, again, I'll go back to the things I've been saying before. I need to know the team. I want to get involved. I want to understand how much I can be as active as I can, as possible. I don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to be a pain in the neck. Obviously, I don't want to be one of those noisy investors that want to always ask very little detail and make the entrepreneur lose time, which is another thing that might be part of the cost of getting a right investor. But one thing I definitely want to have companies that I can actually bring into other projects so they can actually help them expand globally and participate with them.
Great. Can you mention one or two startups you've invested in as a portfolio and why you invested?
Sure. Obviously, we invested with one company out of Austin. It's called Sierra AI. They have a very interesting solution to turn any forklift into like a driverless forklift, enhancing, like improving the safety of operations in warehousing. So warehousing is one of the big operations that's going to grow more and more. And so having that solution is definitely relevant, for example. Another one we worked on is we invested is actually Zenus. Zenus, it's a solution for facial analytics and not facial recognition. It's a very subtle difference, but it will get into very deep mathematics if you look at that.
Great. Well, let's talk about the challenges you see out there for startups and investors in general. Let's start with the startup. What do you see as the primary challenge startups face in today's market?
I think ultimately I go back to what I was saying again. It's trust. You have to be able to build that level of trust. There's a lot of startups asking for money to every place, everywhere. You better have a very compelling story. You have to be able to build relationships that are trustworthy and long-standing. You want people to come along with the journey with you and don't want to have somebody waiting for things to happen, just sitting on the side. You know what I mean? You want somebody that is just really next to you. You want a partner more than just their money. So that's one thing, and that's for startups. I think build that trust.
Great. And then for the investor, what's the challenge in today's market that you see there?
I think there's one of the biggest challenges that there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of companies. You're going to have lots of startups from every angle of the world. And, in our case, we work across multiple continents. I'm speaking to you today from Madrid, Spain. So I'm in the US very often. We have a relationship in South America. And we have a relationship in Eastern Europe and so on. And there's so many things, so many companies happening everywhere. So be aware, ask questions. And it doesn't mean that maybe the best startup is on the other side of the world, out of a country that you never know. But it's not just because of the country. You don't know. Like, talk to the people, ask them questions. People need to build. If the founders are building that trust, and you ask the questions, people will be comfortable. And if they don't answer your third question, don't put your money there.
Good point. So we've already talked about some of the applications and sectors out there that you follow, like space and water. If you had to look at subsectors or specific applications in those two, what do you think are good opportunities for investors to pursue within, say, space and water?
Okay, in space, one of the areas I'm looking at is actually orbital logistics. So if we imagine like a country like Brazil or Australia start floating up in our heads, let's put it this way, in Leo, you need to start moving products across different orbits. And so how do you move them? What's the best system to move them around? So that's one area that I'm very much looking at it. I have some ideas. There's few companies looking at it, but that's one thing. And if you talk about water, I'd say there's a lot of water has been taken into always dissected into silos. So every industry has a water issue. You can go from pharmaceutical to oil and gas. You can go to the food industry to landfills. Everybody has a water issue, but everybody's trying to solve it in a silo. So one thing that's interesting, look at technologies that work across those silos and are able to address multiple issues across different silos. And another thing that I would say, if you look at technology, remember that technology is agnostic of the language you speak. Mathematics, physics, chemistry, they work everywhere. The rules are the same everywhere around the world. What makes it specific is when you start talking about business. Business is a cultural thing. It's a humanistic piece. Business is done by people. And so that's when you start, building those bridges of relationships. And that's when it's important to start having a conversation. Do not invest if you don't talk with the founders. So that's one thing I always advise.
Great. And so in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Well, it's funny, going back to your very first question, how did my journey started from from being an engineer all the way to investing in early stage startups and becoming part of the Houston Angel Network, which is one of the largest angel network in the country, at least the most active angel network in the country. It started by finding all of a sudden that I was an innovator, and I didn't know it. I thought I was like a hardcore engineering, solving very engineering project. And so in 2018, I started writing a book that's called Next. The subtitle is How to Innovate From Within. So basically, it's sort of like my journey of identifying myself as an innovator, but ultimately it turns out to what it takes to each one of us to be an innovator. That means that each one of us has a role. And as we acknowledge that role and we take head on some of the obstacles that usually bound us and limit us into impacting the ecosystems we belong to, then we can actually make a change. Those changes are relevant. So what is your next move? Plan your next move or think about it. And that's the book is all about.
Great. So how best for the audience to get a hold of the book? Where can it be found?
Yeah, the book is on Amazon, is on Barnes and Nobles and other digital platforms, so you can actually find that. There's some references on my link profile. Reach out to me if you cannot find it. You can reach out to me either on LinkedIn or through my email, Giuseppe@bridgingvalue.com, and I'll be glad to share more about this because I've seen the book referenced in areas I never thought about it. So people really sending me thank you note. This is one of the best books I've ever I don't know. I didn't write it for people redefining their complete career or stuff like that, or talking into their family. I'm it's a little journey of my own. So I'm actually very glad if it can make a positive impact onto people and people's lives and their ecosystems.
Great. We'll include your contact details in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. And then we have a lot more topic talking about international companies, what it takes to go beyond those frontiers. It'll be a great conversation to have there, Hal.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Hall T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.